very impressive.
Yeah, and as to be fair, I mean the cast. David Elliott, who played Mark Wright, who lost his life in the incident that the film's about. David won a Scottish BAFTA for his role in the film. The number 2 on the film was the Game of Thrones star Mark Stanley.
Yeah.
So Mark had been in Game of Thrones, I think, for 4 seasons, and I was number 3. So you're talking about a top class cast. You're looking around, going like, David's won his BAFTA, Mark's been in Game of Thrones, and I'm really proud of that. That I held my own amongst the company like that. So yeah.
Well, definitely, and to be told by the guy you portrayed that you got it 99.99% right is you cannot, as an actor, I think, get any better than that. Because I say the 100% would be if you were actually out there at the time in the shit, as I said, with the bum language.
His mum and his brother said it was, and that they know Stu, and they said you got the humour, you got the. Even Stu said to me, I couldn't believe when my character was standing still. He said you even held the weapon and stood the same way that I stand, and I was like, it's just homework. There's loads of pictures of Stu online that I was googling to find out. Kind of shows that literally, the funny thing with doing the true story was, when you're chatting to Stu told me certain parts of what he remembered. Yeah. Because obviously Stu lost his leg in an incident where he stood on a landmine. So he went up, and then after that, from that point on, he was getting morphine put in his body. Yeah. So I was chatting to him about when it exploded. I said, how did it feel? Kind of what happened after it? He said, I stood on the landmine. He says, I flew up in the air. I landed on the ground, and I said, oh, for sake. Right? That's his line.
Yeah.
And I took out my morphine and I put it in my leg, and all the training kicked in, and essentially me to do that day. And in my head I was going, God, well, that's not going to make much of the soldier is there quite calm, just fixes everything after his leg's been blown off. And the pub with his mates, and we were 6 a.m, and I was saying to the guys about what Stu was telling me. I said, Stu was telling me that he was really calm and that he did everything he'd been trained to do. And they said, did he? No, he didn't. He's screaming for his mammy. He says he was screaming. And then they said, he was full of morphine, so he doesn't remember. We'll tell you what happened. So the nice thing was that kind of opened up artistic license. And it meant I could play the situation. I was going to go, right, okay, I'll give Stu, if you watch the film, you see it, he lands and I give him his line. I say, oh, for F's sake. And then from then on, I say to him, the scene's mine. Then it's mine. I'm going to do what I want to do it. So I'm very proud of it.
That is very, very good. What you just said as well. What he said. Sorry, it's just I'm one of these persons. Flicks my mind going as well. I actually know some guys who are out in Vietnam as well. And what you just said is true. There's some of the horrific things that they go through, and there's one guy there who's very much the same. He going off on a tangent. Sorry, Scott.
Don't worry.
But he was there was a big. I won't go into it long. Big patrol went wrong. I think they were surrounded. There's about 15 of them. And they got surrounded by like 300 NVA troops in the end, and it was all going off. And they just turned to this one guy who's a friend of mine now, Riley Cox, and he'd been split open in the middle. His one hand was all mangled, and he basically, when they turned round to try and get him onto the chopper, he refused to go. He was just picking up the machine guns and of people lying around, shooting, trying to protect his friends, saying, "Look, they're worse than me. You get them." And when he looked, his left hand, his right hand was all mangled, pushing his stomach back in, one hand on the shotgun, and they essentially dragged the guy back because he was so fueled with adrenaline. And he's had 35 surgeries in the following 2 years for that.
Wow.
But yeah, he's suffering now with cancer and stuff because of all the crap they gave you. But yeah, no, I think what you just said about Stu is probably very similar as well. Stepped under mine, oh, for sake. It's that kind of, the adrenaline gets to you so much when you're in that kind of a situation that you just carry on. But obviously then the morphine kicks in, like in Stu's case, and you just off your head. Sorry, I know that's a tangent story there.
Not at all. It's interesting to hear. Interesting.
Yeah, that's how I started interviewing. I did it a couple of years ago. It was Vietnam veteran. I used to run a reenactment group, which I guess has kept me acting going because I was doing that on weekends and teaching people how they lived and stuff for several years. And I ran that, and I ended up meeting a few also online, and spoke to Vietnam veterans. Said, "Look, I'm not exactly the shape that you guys were when you were in the war. Would you mind if I portray?" And they were so grateful. They said, "No one's ever done this. I've got patches which made off the only uniforms they brought back with them. They sent me the airborne eagles and stuff and badges and maps and books and everything. Phenomenal guys. And I did it for a history teacher friend of mine in Doncaster for his class. I interviewed a couple of them.
Wow, well, good on you. I mean, these are stories that need to be told. So
yeah, Joe Galloway. Thank you. Joe Galloway was one of them. He's. Do you remember We Were Soldiers?
Yes, I do.
The photographer, the combat photographer, played by Barry Pepper.
Ah, right.
It was the original guy, Joe Galloway, the original person. I've had him on the show. I spoke to him, and he was great because he had a completely different angle to a guy who was a ranger. Because the ranger was all like gung ho, and he really supported what he did there, whereas Joe Galloway had the vision of, the other side of it. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking at the movie premiere of Kajaki, when we were chatting to the press, they were saying, "Oh, it must have been such a hard job to work in that conditions in the desert, with that heat, Scott. It must have been 12-hour days." And I'm like, I can't really comment because I'm standing next to Stu Pearson, who did it for real under fire. Do you know what I mean? Like we had ice bottled water, we had umbrellas, we had a 5-star hotel to go back to. I can't really claim that it was really hard work because Stu's standing next to me, and he wouldn't let me tell you it was hard work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your nice 5-star hotel. He had a piece of canvas to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do. No, full respect for anyone who does that. I really do. And I think you hit the nail on the head as well when you mentioned about the film and the fact that it's one of the first, or the rare British films to portray the war situation, because we do, in my personal opinion, this is, but I think we lack that passion and respect, I think, of the armed forces and what they actually do. We don't have the same pride that the Americans have, because it brings tears to my eyes when I see some of the pride that they've got with the ceremonies and what they, how they treat it, and then I'll see how we're treated over here, and I'm not going to get you don't want to get you involved in case you get in trouble, but that's just my view. I just think we don't celebrate and we don't.
No, I think Kajaki was a film that most of the people that left the cinema after watching Kajaki had a different viewpoint on what being in the military was. I think they started to realise, wow, these guys are incredible. Do you know what I mean? The guys go over there with very little resources in terms of kind of the med kits and stuff that they have when something goes wrong, and they do a wonderful job with what they have.
Exactly, they do. I mean, you're right, and they were so under-equipped as well for a lot of stuff. So yeah, they do an absolutely fantastic job. Cool. So moving on, I could talk all night, as you can gather, about that kind of thing. How did you feel going on to Highlander, going on to Outlander? Sorry. How did it feel when you were told you'd been successful for the casting for that? Because obviously by season 2, you knew how big the show was.
Well, I'll tell you what happened was I was working at the Edinburgh Festival. I was doing a stage play at the Edinburgh Festival for a Finnish theatre company, and I got a phone call from my agent saying, could you go and audition for this show called Outlander? Yeah. So I went home that night and I looked at the script they'd sent, and my wife and I started watching season 1. And I think 3 episodes in, she's saying, do you want to watch another one? Do you want to watch another one? And it just, I don't know how many we watched in the first night, but we just kept watching it and watching it. Yeah. And over the next couple of days, we hoovered up the whole for the first season. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And I kept saying to her, I said, imagine me walking in with Sam and the other cast. Imagine I got a part and I'd be walking in. And then I went to the audition in Edinburgh. I thought it went really well. It was only a few lines, but I'd done as much homework and prep as I could for it. Yeah. I actually studied a lot of the other characters' lines to try and get a subtext going on, because I didn't have loads of lines. Yeah. So I thought I have to get a subtext going on with a lot of the other things that I'm doing. I have to do a lot off lines, a lot of act when I'm not speaking, because I don't have loads of lines. So I thought the audition went well, and then my wife and I were hiring a car for the weekend. We went down to Loch Lomond, and I got a phone call from my agent when we were in the hire car place, and the agent said, Outlander have offered you the job. So I received this information on the phone. I turn around to my wife and I say to her, I've got the Outlander job. And she's like, yes, that's brilliant. And I say to her, we're not going to Mexico, because we'd booked a holiday and we were supposed to be going to Mexico. I say, we're not going to Mexico. And she instantly busts out crying and starts crying to me in the hire place where we're hiring the car. And I'm like, oh no, give me a hug. I'm like, we'll go on another holiday, it'll be fine. So yeah, that was that. And then so I got offered, I think it was 4 weeks initially that I was supposed to be on the show. That was the first offer. So it was 4 weeks. So what I'd done was I phoned up the travel agent and I said, look, can we move our holiday by 6 weeks? because I've got a job I'm doing for 4 weeks. They said, no problem, it'll cost you £400. That's fine. Paid the £400, moved to holiday, went and filmed Outlander, and then they said, we'd like to keep you on for another 4 weeks. And I was like, oh no, I need to tell the wife again that we're not going to Mexico. And I remember speaking to the agent, and I said, look, I don't know, do you mean, what do you think? Do you think I should just say no and go on the holiday with my wife and save my marriage? And my agent said, Scott, you're not going to Mexico. That's what my agent said, you're not going to Mexico. You don't say no to Outlander. He's like, you're doing it. I was like, all right, okay. And thankfully my wife didn't divorce me. So, yeah. That's it.
Cool. So it was initially a bittersweet one then.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Oh dear. Well, it's good to see that you are still married. And
well, yeah. Now she'll be divorcing me because of the time I'm spending on Twitter and Facebook chatting to people.
I know. Yeah. So I don't want to keep you too long.
My coat's always on a sugary peg. It's always on a sugary peg.
Your dinner thrown out on the floor when you get home.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. What was the atmosphere like on set? This is the last question I have before we get on to fan questions. The atmosphere, again, we've talked briefly about the kind of show it is and how they interacted with fans. How were they on set? Well, was it a welcoming set? Was it friendly?
Oh yeah, I remember one of the nicest things was obviously going in, you look at the script, you get Simon Callow, cast like that, Graham McTavish, Katrina, Sam, Stephen, these guys that have got loads of experience doing other things. And I'm going in and I've got 4 lines. Do you know what I mean? I've got 4 lines in one of the episodes. So my first read through it, I think I had about 4 lines to read. So I was going in thinking probably nobody will notice me or pay much attention to me because I'm only doing my 4 lines. And I remember sitting down at the read through table. So you sit at the table together and you read the story, you read the script together. Yeah. And Sam tapped me on the shoulder when I was sitting down and he said, "Hiya Scott, I'm Sam." And I was like, yeah, I know who you are. Do you know what I mean? But it's really cool that you've taken the time to find out who I am and you've taken the time to say hello. So things like that and Kat and Stephen, that are just very welcoming. It's the explanation I say to folk is going onto the show for me felt a bit like jumping onto a merry-go-round as a kid. Yeah. You know what I mean? When you used to jump on the merry-go-round and you had to time it perfectly so as you landed and you went with the merry-go-round and you didn't get flung off. Yeah. And that felt like you knew the show was really successful. It was very successful before I arrived. Yeah. So it wasn't needing my input. It just needed somebody to play the role that I was going to be playing. And I was fortunate enough to be given that. So I felt I had to time it right, jump on at the right time, be in the same level as the guys that were there, and then when it was time to get off, be able to step off. And people wish you well on the way rather than throwing you off. Yeah. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Some of the best times in my life was being on the show. At the same time, you're asking the atmosphere. I mean, when we were doing some of the battle scenes, I mean that was quite emotional. I just came from obviously doing Kajaki, which was a war film, and it was a modern day war film. And lying in the desert floor, playing real people, and listening to words that had been said by real soldiers, was very emotional. And then coming in and playing a Highlander, who back in the 1700s, kind of might not have been. It's not a true story in the sense that these words are his, but the situation was the same. Yeah, you're playing somebody who would have been in the situation that you're playing, and having to tell that story. So it's emotional when you see 400 redcoats across the field, and you look round and you've got 400 Highlanders behind you. You can't help but feel that you've been transported through time. Yeah, it's emotional, very emotional.
I think that's what Braveheart captured as well. Outlander does it brilliantly, but that's the Braveheart. That's what everyone, even as historically inaccurate as it is, there's always that moment where you've got the, or not. It's not just Brave. Any of those, you can just see that's going to be a raw emotional scene when you've got that many people just facing each other, and especially for you with Outlander, redcoats and the history of the redcoats and the bloody history of what they did, and. I guess it all comes to the forefront then. It just something that's just you really feel the passion of those guys 300 years ago, 250 years ago.
Yeah, just stories that have been passed on, and I had never visited Culloden until I get involved with the show. So actually, after filming, I went up and did the tour of Culloden, and it was strange because obviously there's loads of tourists there. Everybody's probably feeling emotional, but I could visualise the guys that I stood with. When they were saying, and the Scots lined up here, and in my head I got a very clear picture of the faces of the guys that I lined up with. Yeah, do you know what I mean? And looking out, we actually looked across a field at redcoats. So when I was standing on Culloden, I had a very, very clear picture of what they've been like. Do you know what I mean? So it was definitely very emotional.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Yes, That's actually a very interesting take on how you can sort of get involved and get that emotion going for that. Yeah. Very, very cool. Cool.